Hey everyone, and welcome back to Investing Talk Podcast. Today we're diving into Sirius XM Holdings, ticker symbol SIRI. This company's been making some noise lately in the financial world. We're going to unpack it all right here. So I'm sure most of you know Sirius XM for their satellite radio. You know those tunes that keep you company on those long drives. But their recent performance is kind of hinting that there might be something more to the story. Are they becoming more than just a soundtrack for our commutes? Well, let's find out. One thing that really jumped out at us is Sirius XM's stock price lately. It closed at $27.11 on February 14th, 2025, a 2.53% jump. Pretty impressive, right? Makes you wonder what's fueling that momentum.
Yeah, it's definitely a positive sign. But, we got to look at the bigger picture here. While SIRI has been trending upwards, remember their stock's taken a pretty big hit over the past 3 years. We're talking over 60% of its value. So we're really looking at a company that's at a turning point.
A turning point, huh? Interesting. So what factors are making this such a crucial moment for them?
Well, for one thing, their fourth quarter earnings for 2024 were really strong. They actually beat analysts' expectations, brought in $2.19 billion in quarterly revenue, and that all added up to $8.7 billion for the whole year.
Okay, so financially they're exceeding expectations. But what else is happening? What's driving this recent upswing?
Well, they've been making some smart moves, especially with their content. They've got new podcasts with some big names, Jimmy Johnson, Marty Smith. They even snagged the Fantasy Footballers podcast, which is huge for fantasy sports fans. And for all the racing fans out there, they're covering the Daytona 500. So it looks like they're definitely expanding beyond music.
Wow, the fantasy footballers. That's a smart move. Fantasy football's everywhere these days. It seems like they're really understanding that they got to tap into new markets if they want to keep growing.
Exactly. And get this, their new SXM-9 satellite is up and running. That's a big deal technology-wise. Shows they're serious about innovation.
So we got strong earnings, new partnerships, cutting-edge tech. Sounds like a recipe for success, right?
Well, it's never that simple. There are always things to be cautious about. For example, SIRI is trading at a discount compared to other companies in the communication services sector, meaning investors aren't valuing it as highly. Makes you wonder why.
That is interesting. So even with all the good news, there's still some hesitation. What are investors worried about?
Well, there are concerns about their capital allocation, basically how they're using their money to grow the business. Some analysts think they could be doing better with cost-cutting and investment strategies. Plus, the satellite radio market itself isn't exactly booming.
So it's a classic risk versus reward situation. High potential for growth, but with some risks to keep in mind. What are analysts saying about all this?
Right now, they're neutral on XIRI, giving it a hold rating. The average 12-month price target is $27.04, but the estimates are all over the place. Some say it could go as low as $16, others think it could hit $43. So, yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty.
Okay, so it sounds like SiriusXM is a company to keep an eye on that would really take off or they could stumble. What should our listeners be watching for in the coming months? What will tell us if they're headed in the right direction?
The next few quarters will be key. Look at their subscriber growth, especially with all this new content they're offering. Are they getting new subscribers and keeping the ones they have? Also, keep an eye on their cost management. Are they controlling expenses while still investing in growth? And maybe most importantly, how are they adapting to the changing media world? Can they stay ahead of the curve? These are all questions investors should be asking. One thing that always comes up with companies like SiriusXM is their dividend. It can tell you a lot about their financial health and how confident they are about the future.
That's a great point. Dividends are a big deal for a lot of investors, especially those who want a steady income stream. So what's SiriusXM's dividend history like?
Well, they just announced a quarterly cash dividend of $0.27 per share, payable on February 25th, 2025. And they've been pretty consistent with their payouts, which is definitely attractive to income-focused investors. But the real question is, can they keep it up in the long run, especially with all the competition they're facing?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? A dividend is only good if the company can actually afford to pay it. So what should investors be thinking about when they're looking at SiriusXM's dividend?
We got to look at the financials carefully. Yeah, their earnings report was good, and they're bringing in cash. But they also have debt and operating expenses to think about. It's all a balancing act.
So should investors be worried about the dividend? Is there a chance they might cut it down the line?
It's possible, but not a sure thing. It all comes down to whether they can keep growing their revenue and managing costs. If they stay strong financially, the dividend could be a nice bonus for investors. But if things go south, the dividend might be the first thing to go to save money.
Makes sense. It's a good reminder that dividends aren't a guarantee, and investors always need to consider the company's overall health. Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about competition. Specifically, the big ones, streaming services like Spotify and Apple Music. They're a huge force in music right now. How much of a threat are they to SiriusXM's business model?
That's a valid concern. The media world is changing fast, and there's no doubt that streaming services are shaking things up. They offer tons of music, personalized playlists, on-demand listening, all for a pretty low monthly price. It's a pretty good deal for consumers.
Yeah, I got to admit, I'm a Spotify subscriber myself. It's hard to beat the convenience and the variety. So how is SiriusXM responding to all this? Are they just going to sit back and watch their subscribers go elsewhere?
Not at all. They're actually doing a few things to stay competitive. First, they're focusing on what they do best. They have exclusive content you can't get on streaming services, things like live sports broadcasts, lots of talk radio shows, and of course, Howard Stern.
Right, Howard Stone. He's been a SiriusXM staple for years. But is that enough to keep them afloat in the streaming world?
Well, it's definitely a valuable asset, but they're not putting all their eggs in one basket. They're also making partnerships to reach more people. For example, they've teamed up with car companies like Tesla and Rivian to put SiriusXM right into new vehicles.
That's smart. It gives them a built-in audience. People buying new cars are more likely to try out satellite radio if it's already there. But what about people like me who are hooked on our Spotify playlists? What's SiriusXM doing to attract us?
They're actually investing in their own streaming platform, adding more on-demand content, personalized features, trying to make it more competitive with the other guys, and they're also buying other companies to get more content and attract a wider audience.
So it sounds like SiriusXM is fighting hard to stay relevant. They're using their unique content-forming partnerships and embracing the whole streaming trend. But the question is, will it be enough to make them successful in the long term?
That's the big question. Only time will tell. The media industry is constantly changing. SiriusXM needs to be flexible and adapt if they want to thrive. It all depends on whether they can innovate, keep their content fresh and appealing, and attract new subscribers while holding on to the ones they have.
It's definitely a story to watch. Okay, before we get to listener questions, let's talk about the potential upside for SiriusXM. What would a really good scenario look like for them? What would it take for their stock price to really take off?
For SiriusXM to really hit it big, a few things would need to happen. First and foremost, they got to get a lot more subscribers, both for their satellite radio and their streaming platform. They need to show investors they can not only attract new listeners, but also keep the ones they already have. And that's tough in such a competitive market.
Subscriber growth is definitely key. What else would need to happen to convince investors that SiriusXM is a real growth story?
They have to show strong and consistent financial performance, steady revenue growth, bigger profit margins, good cost management. They need to prove to Wall Street that they're not just surviving, but actually doing really well in this new media world.
So they need to show that their business model can work and make money over the long haul. What else could help SiriusXM succeed and drive their stock price higher?
They need to keep innovating and expanding what they offer. They can't just sit back and relax. They got to stay ahead of the curve with technology and programming. Maybe that means partnering with other media companies, creating new original content, or even trying out new formats like video or podcasts.
It sounds like staying ahead of the game, constantly evolving and reaching more people are crucial for their success. All right, let's hear what our listeners have to say. We've got some great questions lined up.
Sounds good. Let's dive in.
Yeah, that was a great conversation about SiriusXM. They're facing some really interesting challenges, but also some great opportunities. It's definitely a company to keep on our radar.
Absolutely. They're at a crossroads, and it'll be fascinating to see what they do next.
So for our listeners who are following this story, what will they be looking out for in the coming months? What are the signs that SiriusXM is on the right track?
Well, like we talked about, subscriber growth is key. Check their quarterly reports, see if they're adding new subscribers and keeping the ones they already have. Look at both their satellite radio numbers and how their streaming platform is doing.
Right, subscriber growth is super important. But what about their financials? What should investors be watching for there?
Look for steady revenue growth and increasing profit margins. That'll show that their business model is working and they're managing their costs well. Also, keep an eye on their debt levels. Make sure they're not taking on too much.
So it's all about finding that balance between growth and financial stability. They got to show both if they want to impress investors.
Exactly. And don't forget about innovation. Are they investing in new technology and content? Making smart partnerships and acquisitions? Those are all good signs that they're staying ahead of the game.
Sounds like there's a lot to think about when it comes to SiriusXM. But that's what makes investing so interesting, right? It's about doing your research, weighing the risks and rewards, and making smart decisions.
You got it. And remember, no one can predict the future. There's always some uncertainty when it comes to investing. But by staying informed and doing your homework, you can give yourself the best chance of success.
Well said. So to sum it all up for our listeners, what's the main takeaway about SiriusXM? What's the one thing you want them to remember?
SiriusXM has a lot of potential, but they also have some tough challenges ahead. They've got a strong brand and a loyal customer base, and they're making changes to adapt to the new media world. But they need to execute their plan well and convince investors that they're a good long-term bet.
It's a story that's still unfolding, and we'll be following it closely to see what happens next. All right, listeners, that's all the time we have for today. We hope you enjoyed this look at Sirius XM Holdings, ticker symbol SIRI. If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe to Investing Talk Podcast. Share it with your friends and leave us a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, happy investing.